The last time someone said something you didn't like, you didn't decide how to respond. Something inside you responded for you, something you don't control, something that activates before your conscious mind has time to intervene. And that something, that force that grabs the steering wheel of your life every time an intense emotion shows up, has cost you more than you dare to calculate. Relationships destroyed in 30 seconds of fury you couldn't contain. Opportunities lost because an impulse acted before your brain finished processing what was happening. Words said in the heat of the moment that you can't shove back into your mouth no matter how hard you try. Decisions made from anger, from fear, from anxiety that changed the course of your life in directions you never would have chosen if you'd had 3 more seconds to think. You are a slave, not to a person, not to a system, not to an external circumstance you can point your finger at and say, "That's what has me trapped." You are a slave to something much closer, much more intimate, and much harder to confront than any external oppressor, your own emotions. And the worst part of this slavery, what makes it the most dangerous and the most enduring of all the slaveries a human being can experience, is that you don't know you're wearing it. You don't see it. You don't feel it as a chain. You feel it as nature. You believe that's just who you are. That reacting with rage when something bothers you is your personality. That exploding when you're pressured is your character. That being dragged around by what you feel is being authentic, and that not doing so would be being fake. That belief is the lock that keeps the chains in place. As long as you believe your emotional reactions are just who you are, instead of a learned pattern you can change, the chains are going to stay exactly where they are, invisible, comfortable in their familiarity, destroying you without you noticing because they've always been there, and you don't know life without them. You think you're free because nobody puts visible chains on your wrists. You think you own your decisions because nobody forces you at gunpoint to make them. But every time you react without thinking, every time an emotion takes control of your behavior, and you simply obey what that emotion commands you to do, like a soldier obeying the orders of a deranged general, you're proving you're not free. You're proving you're an instrument anyone can play if they know which string to press. And everyone knows which string to press in you. And everyone knows which button to push. Your partner knows it. Your boss knows it. Your kids know it. The stranger who cuts you off in traffic knows it, even though they don't know you. Anyone who has spent 5 minutes with you knows exactly how to provoke you, how to knock you off your center, how to make the rational, competent man you think you are disappear and be replaced by someone who says things he doesn't mean, does things he doesn't want to do, and destroys things that matter to him, all in the name of an emotion that lasted 30 seconds, but whose consequences are going to last years. The Stoics identified this problem more than 2,000 years ago, not with the language of modern psychology, with the brutal clarity of people who observed human behavior with an honesty most people can't tolerate. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful emperor in the world, wrote in his personal journal about the need to not let himself be dragged by emotions, not because he didn't feel them. He felt them with the intensity of any human being who faces wars, betrayals, plagues, and the death of his children. But he understood that feeling an emotion and obeying it are 2 completely different things. That between the stimulus that triggers it and the response you choose to give there is a space, and that in that space lives your freedom or your slavery, depending on whether you use it or ignore it. Seneca wrote an entire treatise on anger, not a paragraph, not a chapter, a complete treatise dedicated to a single emotion, because he understood that anger, that emotion you consider natural, inevitable, even justified, is the most destructive force operating inside a human being. He called it Brief madness. A madness that lasts seconds, but produces damage that lasts decades. And you, every time you surrender to that madness saying, "They provoked me," or "anyone would react that way," are choosing madness over reason. You're choosing slavery over freedom. You're choosing to let a 30-second emotion determine the course of your life for the next 30 years. Epictetus, who was born a literal slave of another human being, who was physically abused until he was left with a permanent disability, who lived the most oppressive conditions life can offer, conquered a freedom that you, with all your external freedom, don't have. He conquered inner freedom. The freedom of not being controlled by what he feels. The freedom to feel rage without letting rage dominate him. The freedom to feel fear without letting fear paralyze him. The freedom to feel pain without letting pain define him. Epictetus was a slave to a man and freed himself. You are free of men, but enslaved by your impulses. And that inner slavery is what we're going to confront in this series. Welcome to episode 1 of Master Your Mind. This is Stoicism for Winners, and this series exists because the most dangerous man in the world isn't the one with enemies on the outside. It's the one with an enemy on the inside that he himself feeds every time he lets his emotions make decisions that belong to his reason. If this episode opens your eyes to a slavery you didn't know you were carrying, drop this phrase in the comments. Today I stop obeying my impulses. Over the next 10 lessons you're going to understand exactly how emotional slavery works, how much it has cost you, and what you can start doing today to break the chains you carry inside. Not with empty motivation, not with pretty phrases that evaporate the next day, with real tools the Stoics forged 2,000 years ago that remain the most advanced technology in existence for governing your inner world. First Stoic lesson. You are not your emotions. You are the one who decides what to do with them. But you've spent your entire life confusing feeling with obeying. This is the most expensive confusion of your life. The confusion behind every relationship you ruined, every opportunity you wasted, every moment where you said or did something the rational version of you would never have said or done. The confusion of believing that you and your emotions are the same thing, that when you feel anger, you are anger, that when you feel fear, you are fear, that when you feel anxiety, you are anxiety, and that therefore what anger wants is what you want. What fear says is what you say. What anxiety commands is what you obey. But you are not your emotions. That sentence sounds simple, but it contains an interior revolution that can change the entire trajectory of your life if you truly internalize it, and not just as an intellectual idea that sounds good in conversation, but that you forget the moment someone cuts you off in traffic. You are something separate from your emotions. You are the observer, the one who watches, the one who notices that anger showed up, the one who registers that fear activated, the one who perceives that anxiety spiked. There is a part of you that sits above the emotion, that can watch it arrive the way you watch a wave approach from the shore, and that has the ability to decide whether to let itself be dragged by that wave or to plant its feet in the sand and let it pass. That part of you, the conscious observer, is who you really are, not the wave, the one who decides what to do with the wave. The wave is going to come. Emotions are going to appear. You can't prevent it. You don't have a switch that turns emotions off and on when it suits you. Every day of your life you're going to feel anger, fear, frustration, anxiety, sadness, jealousy, insecurity, impatience, every single one of those days, without exception, until the day you die. The question isn't whether you're going to feel, you're going to feel. The question is what you're going to do with what you feel. And that's where the confusion between feeling and obeying has destroyed you. Because you've lived as though feeling something were an immediate, non-negotiable order to act. As though the emotion came with a mandatory instruction manual that says, you feel anger, therefore shout. You feel fear, therefore run. You feel anxiety, therefore freeze. You feel jealousy, therefore accuse. You feel insecurity, therefore attack before they attack you. You feel sadness, therefore isolate yourself and don't let anyone see you vulnerable. You've obeyed every emotion like a soldier obeys an order from a general without questioning it, without evaluating whether the order makes sense, without stopping for a single second to ask yourself whether the general giving the order is sane, whether the direction he's pointing is the one that serves you, or whether automatic obedience to that order is going to destroy exactly what you most want to protect. Think about the times you obeyed anger, the times something bothered you and your response was automatic, instant, unfiltered, a shout, an insult, a slammed door, a punishing silence that lasted days, a decision made in the heat of the moment that changed the course of a relationship or an opportunity. In each of those times, you didn't decide to shout. Anger decided for you. You didn't choose to insult. Anger chose for you. You didn't calculate the consequences. Anger doesn't calculate consequences because that's not its job. Its job is to activate. Your job was to decide what to do with it. And you didn't do your job. You let anger do its job, and yours simultaneously. Think about the times you obeyed fear, the opportunities you let pass because fear said, you're not ready, and you obeyed without verifying if it was true. The conversations you avoided because fear said, it's going to go badly, and you believed it without evidence. The decisions you postponed because fear said, wait a little longer, and you waited years that turned into decades of inaction. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this distinction with a clarity you need to hear. Things don't touch your soul, things happen on the outside. The disturbance is generated on the inside, in your interpretation, in your reaction, in your decision to convert an external event into an internal storm. The event is neutral. You put the emotional charge on it, and then you obey that charge as if someone else had put it there. Your boss says something you don't like. That's the event. Neutral. Words traveling through the air, reaching your ears. What happens next is your creation. The interpretation, he's disrespecting me. The emotion, anger. The obedience, you shout, you fight, you shut down, you take it out on someone weaker than you when you get home. None of that was produced by your boss. You produced it. Your boss provided the stimulus. You provided the interpretation, the emotion, and the reaction. And yet, when someone asks why you reacted that way, you say, my boss provoked me, as if he were to blame for the storm you built inside your own mind. Seneca described this process with a metaphor. You should tattoo into your memory, because it's the most precise image of what happens to you every time an emotion takes control. The emotion is like a visitor who knocks on your door. You can't prevent them from knocking. You don't control who shows up or when they show up or how hard they knock. But you decide whether you open the door or leave it closed. Whether you invite them in or tell them, now's not a good time. Whether you offer them a seat in the living room or leave them standing in the doorway. Whether you give them dinner and make up the guest room or tell them their visit is over and it's time to leave. Most people don't just open the door to the emotional visitor with absurd hospitality. They hand over the house keys, give up the master bedroom, let the visitor rearrange the living room furniture to their liking, invite their friends over, change the locks, and basically take complete possession of a space that should be governed by reason and not by the most recent guest who rang the doorbell. The emotion arrives, and you don't just let it in. You move to the couch in your own house while it sleeps in your bed, eats off your plate, and decides the direction of your day. And then you complain that your emotional house is a mess, that you have no peace, that you live in an inner chaos you don't know how to manage. But the chaos isn't a mystery. The chaos is the direct and predictable result of letting any emotional visitor enter your house without a filter, without limits, and without the authority of an owner who knows who can come in and who must stay outside. Epictetus taught that the first emotional reaction, the one that appears automatically before your conscious mind has time to intervene, that first wave that activates in milliseconds like a reflex you can't stop, is not under your control. It's activated by neurological mechanisms older than your ability to think, faster than your conscious reasoning, installed in your brain by millions of years of evolution to protect you from threats that no longer exist, but that your nervous system keeps interpreting as real. Someone insults you, and your body reacts as if a predator attacked you. Someone rejects you, and your nervous system responds as if you've been expelled from the tribe and are about to die alone on the savannah. Those first reactions are automatic, primitive, and uncontrollable, and Epictetus knew it. But what you do after that first automatic reaction, what happens in the next 30 seconds, in the next minute, in the next hour, that is completely, absolutely, non-negotiably under your control. That first wave of rage you feel when someone insults you, you didn't choose it. It appeared on its own. It's biology, it's instinct. You bear no responsibility for it. But the second wave, the one that decides whether you respond to the insult with another insult or whether you stop for a moment, breathe, observe the emotion without obeying it, and consciously choose how to act from your reason rather than from your instinct. That second wave you do choose. You, consciously, with all the responsibility that choice implies. And in that tiny but infinite space between the first automatic wave you don't control and the second conscious wave you do control, lives the most important difference that exists between two types of human beings. The one who is free and the one who is enslaved by his impulses. The first feels the same thing as the second, doesn't feel less, doesn't feel differently, feels the same anger, the same fear, the same frustration, but does something different with what he feels, observes it instead of obeying it, processes it instead of executing it, uses it as information instead of following it as instruction. Your assignment for this lesson is to begin separating yourself from your emotions by observing them instead of obeying them. Today, every time you feel an intense emotion, I want you, instead of acting immediately, to say this phrase internally: I am feeling anger, or I am feeling fear, or whatever it is you're feeling. Not, I'm angry. Not, I'm furious. I am feeling anger. That difference in language is the difference between being the emotion and observing the emotion. Between being the wave and being the one watching the wave from the shore. Practice that phrase every time an intense emotion shows up today. Don't try to control the emotion yet. Just observe it. Just name it. Just put distance between you and it with those 3 words. I am feeling this. That's all for now. It seems small, but it's the first step in a training that is going to completely change your relationship with your inner world. Second Stoic lesson: every time you react without thinking, you hand over control of your life to whoever triggered that reaction, and that includes strangers in traffic. Think about what really happens when someone provokes you and you react. Think about it with the cold clarity this series demands of you. A human being, who could be anyone from your partner to a complete stranger you're never going to see again in your life, does something, or says something, and that act or that word, which probably took them half a second to produce and which they probably forgot 5 minutes later, takes complete control of your emotional state, your behavior, your decisions. For minutes, hours, sometimes entire days. A stranger cuts you off in traffic, an act that lasted 2 seconds, and you spend the next 20 minutes furious, honking the horn, yelling inside your car, with your blood pressure elevated, with your fists clenched on the steering wheel, with your mind writing rage speeches you're never going to deliver because the other driver left 10 miles ago and doesn't even know you exist. 20 minutes of your life, your health, your energy, your peace, handed over for free to someone who doesn't know your name, doesn't care about you, didn't register your existence, and never will. And you gave them 20 minutes of your one and only irreplaceable life as tribute to their 2-second maneuver. Does that seem like a fair exchange to you? 2 seconds of someone else's life in exchange for 20 minutes of yours. And were those 20 good minutes? Were they minutes where you were at peace, where you thought clearly, where you enjoyed the drive? No, they were 20 minutes of self-inflicted misery. 20 minutes where a person who doesn't know you controlled your body, your mind, your emotional state, and your life experience without even trying to. That's what happens every time you react without thinking. You hand another human being the remote control to your inner life. You tell them, without words but with absolute clarity, "Here, control how I feel. Decide whether I have a good day or a bad day. Determine whether I'm at peace or at war. You, a stranger who doesn't matter to me, have the power to decide the quality of my life experience for the next several minutes or hours." And it's not just with strangers in traffic. You do it with your boss when one of his comments ruins your entire day. 8 hours of work contaminated by 30 seconds of a comment that probably wasn't meant to hurt you, or that, if it was, achieved its goal with spectacular efficiency precisely because you allowed it to. You do it with your partner when a 5-minute argument turns into 3 days of silence, resentment, and tension that poison everything they touch. 5 minutes of conflict in exchange for 3 days of shared misery. You do it with your kids when a tantrum from a child who has 1/10 of your life experience sends you over the edge and turns you into the adult you swore you'd never be. You do it with social media when a comment from a stranger who lives in another country, who doesn't know your story, who knows nothing about your life except what they could infer from a 30-word post, ruins your entire afternoon. You sit down to read a response from someone who probably wrote it in 2 seconds while waiting for the bus. And that 2-second response sets up camp in your mind, like a tenant who doesn't pay rent and occupies the living room of your consciousness for hours, pushing aside everything that actually matters: your work, your family, your peace, your purpose. A stranger on the internet stole your afternoon, and you opened the door for them with a smile. You do it with the news when a headline engineered with surgical precision to provoke outrage hits its target with the effectiveness of a sniper nailing the shot on the first try. A headline that a team of people wrote specifically to trigger an emotional reaction in you, because that reaction is what generates clicks, and clicks are what generate money. You are the product. Your emotional reaction is what they sell. And you give it away free every time you read something designed to infuriate you, and allow it to infuriate you exactly as it was designed to do. You do it with the past when a memory of something that happened years ago, something that's already over, something that no longer exists anywhere in the universe except inside your own mind, appears out of nowhere, and you let it take control of your present as if it were happening right now. You relive the argument, you resent the offense, you feel the anger, or the shame, or the pain, with the same intensity as when it originally occurred. And while your body is sitting in the present, your mind has been hijacked by a ghost from the past that has exactly as much power over you as you decide to give it. No more and no less. In every single one of these cases, without exception, the pattern is identical. Someone or something places a stimulus from outside of you, and you hand over control of your inner life as an automatic, instant response, without thinking, without evaluating whether the response you're giving is the one you want to give, without asking yourself whether the person or situation that triggered your reaction deserves the extraordinary power you're giving it over your emotional state, over your peace, over the quality of your life experience for the next several hours. You simply react, like a machine that receives an input and produces a predetermined output with no intermediate processing, like a computer program that executes the same code every time it receives the same signal, like a puppet whose strings are accessible to anyone who knows which one to pull to produce the desired reaction. And the most devastating thing about this pattern is that it's predictable. The people who know you know exactly how you're going to react to every stimulus. Your partner knows which words to say to make you explode. Your co-workers know which topics to touch to make you lose your composure. Your kids know which buttons to push to knock you off center. And it's not that they're brilliant manipulators, it's that you are predictably reactive. You're a simple equation. Stimulus X produces reaction Y every time, without fail, without variation, without surprises. And a predictable person is a controllable person. And a controllable person is not a free person, no matter how much freedom of movement, freedom of expression, and money in the bank they might have to buy anything they want, except the one thing that actually matters: sovereignty over their own interior. Marcus Aurelius reflected constantly on this phenomenon because he lived it with an intensity you can't imagine. He was the most powerful man in the world, and yet was surrounded by people who constantly tried to provoke reactions in him. Courtiers who sought to manipulate him through his emotions. Generals who tried to pressure him with manufactured urgencies. Advisors who used fear to influence his decisions. And Marcus Aurelius, instead of reacting to every provocation as they expected, would stop, observe, evaluate, and respond, not react from a place of deliberate calm that frustrated everyone who tried to control him through his emotions. He wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." That sentence is not denial of pain. It's the declaration that the power to decide whether something hurts you resides in you, not in whoever tried to hurt you. Seneca explained it from a devastatingly clear, practical perspective. Every time you allow someone else to control your emotional state, you're giving them more power over you than any emperor has ever had over his subjects. Because an emperor can control your body, your location, your possessions, but only you can hand over control of your mind. And you hand it over voluntarily, without anyone asking, every time you react without thinking to a provocation that didn't deserve even 2 seconds of your attention. Epictetus, who lived the experience of another human being literally controlling his body, his time, and his freedom of movement, understood better than anyone the difference between external control and internal control. Someone could chain him, someone could beat him, someone could decide where he slept and what he ate. But nobody, absolutely nobody, could decide how he responded internally to what was done to him. That ability was his and his alone, and he guarded it more fiercely than any free man guards his material possessions. Because he understood that possessions can be recovered, but that inner sovereignty, once surrendered, is lost in a way no amount of money can buy back. Your assignment for this lesson is to take a control surrender inventory. Today, at the end of the day, before you go to sleep, write down every moment where someone or something took control of your emotional state. Don't judge them yet, just log them. Who or what triggered the reaction, how long the disturbance lasted, and what you did during that time that you wouldn't have done if you'd been in control of yourself. When you see the list, when you see how many times in a single day you handed over control of your inner life to people and situations that didn't deserve a single second of your peace, you're going to understand with painful clarity the real price of emotional reactivity, not an abstract price, a price measured in minutes of your life that you gave away to those who didn't deserve them. Minutes that don't come back, that nobody is going to return, that are gone forever because you didn't know how or didn't want to keep the remote control of your own life in your own hands. Third Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul is dyed the color of its thoughts, and you've let anyone paint yours whatever color they please. Marcus Aurelius wrote one of the most powerful and most ignored sentences in all of Western philosophy. The soul is dyed the color of its thoughts. 8 words that contain a truth so profound that if you truly internalized it, if you let it penetrate beyond the intellectual surface where most philosophical ideas float around doing nothing, it would change your life before this week is over. Your soul, your interior, your permanent emotional state, the background experience that tints every moment of your existence, doesn't have a predetermined color of its own. You weren't born sad. You weren't born anxious. You weren't born angry. Your interior is dyed, the color of the thoughts that inhabit it. If your thoughts are dark, your life experience is dark. If your thoughts are clear, your life experience is clear. Not because the external world is different in one case versus the other, because the filter through which you experience that world changes completely depending on which thoughts dominate your mind at any given moment. And here comes the part that's going to sting. You don't choose your thoughts, at least not consciously. You don't sit down every morning and say, "Today I'm going to think productive thoughts that dye my soul in luminous colors." What you do is leave the door of your mind wide open and allow any thought to enter, set up camp, and start painting the walls whatever color it feels like. And since most thoughts that enter without a filter are reactive, negative, catastrophic, resentful, or fearful, the dominant color of your soul is exactly that. A murky mixture of unprocessed anger, unconfronted fear, resentment fed for years, and anxiety about a future that doesn't exist yet and probably never will in the way your mind imagines it. It's not that your life is objectively terrible. It's that the filter through which you experience it is painted in colors that make everything seem worse than it is. The same day, the same circumstances, the same objective reality is experienced in radically different ways depending on the color of your thoughts. A man with thoughts dominated by gratitude experiences an ordinary Tuesday as a day full of small, valuable things worth noticing. A man with thoughts dominated by resentment experiences the same Tuesday as another crappy day in a life that doesn't give him what he deserves. The Tuesday is exactly the same. The thoughts are different. And the thoughts determine the experience, not external reality. But you don't just let your own unfiltered thoughts paint your soul whatever color they please. You let the thoughts and actions of others do it too. You let your boss's opinion determine the color of your entire morning. You let your mother-in-law's dismissive comment determine the color of your afternoon. You let a stranger's provocative post on social media determine the color of your evening. You let your co-worker's face when you arrive in the morning determine whether you're going to have a good day or a bad day before you've even started working. Anyone who has access to your attention has direct access to your soul. And since you have no filter, since you have no guard at the door of your mind, evaluating which thoughts deserve to enter and which should stay outside waiting on the street. Anyone can walk in and paint whatever they want, in whatever color they want, without your consent. Marcus Aurelius lived surrounded by people who tried to paint his soul constantly and with an aggressiveness you can't imagine. Courtiers who wanted to dye it with fear to control him through panic. Flatterers who wanted to dye it with vanity to manipulate him through ego. Enemies who wanted to dye it with rage to destabilize him and provoke impulsive decisions they could use against him. Generals who wanted to dye it with urgency to pressure him into acting before thinking. And every morning, before any of them had access to him, Marcus Aurelius did a deliberate exercise of choosing the color of his thoughts before someone else chose it for him. He sat with his journal. He wrote. He reminded himself which thoughts deserved to inhabit his mind that day and which should be turned away at the door, regardless of who sent them. He would write things like, "Today I'm going to encounter meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, envious people. I will not be surprised or disturbed, because I know it's impossible for the world to be free of such people. They exist because they don't know the difference between good and evil." That's not pessimism. That's the most sophisticated mental preparation a human being can do before facing their day. It's choosing in advance the color of your thoughts in the face of situations you know are going to happen with absolute certainty. It's painting your soul the color you choose before the day's circumstances. Try to paint it the color they want. It's taking the brush in your own hand instead of leaving it in the hands of circumstances and the people you're going to cross paths with over the next several hours. Seneca taught that the unprotected mind is like a city without walls. Any invader can enter and sack it without resistance. And that most people live exactly like that, with the mind completely open. No guard at the gate, no filter at the entrance, without the slightest discrimination about which thoughts they let through and which they reject. They live with the mind as a public square where anyone can come in to sell whatever they want, shout whatever they want, dump whatever trash they want, and then they complain that their interior is chaos. They complain they have no peace. They complain they live anxious, resentful, fearful, emotionally exhausted. But never, not once, does it occur to them that the chaos, the anguish, and the resentment aren't inevitable visitors who show up because life is hard, but invaders who got in because absolutely nobody was guarding the door. Epictetus put it with his usual devastating clarity. It's not things that disturb you, but your judgments about things. Your thoughts about what happens are what paint your soul, not what happens itself. Getting fired doesn't destroy you. Your thought, "I'm finished, I'll never find anything better, I'm a failure," destroys you. The argument with your partner doesn't ruin your day. Your thought, "It's always the same, this relationship doesn't work, it's never going to change, I'm going to be trapped here forever," ruins your day. The event is the blank canvas, neutral, with no color of its own. Your thought is the paint that gives it color. And you're letting anyone, from your boss to a social media algorithm designed to maximize your outrage, choose the paint while you don't even know there's a brush in your hand waiting for you to pick it up. Your assignment for this lesson is to start consciously choosing the color of your thoughts using Marcus Aurelius's technique. Tomorrow, before your day starts, before you open your phone, before you talk to anyone, before you expose yourself to any external stimulus that tries to paint your soul for you, write down 3 thoughts you choose as the dominant color of your day. Not empty motivational affirmations that don't survive contact with reality. Real, honest, applicable thoughts about how you're going to interpret what happens to you today. Today, I'm going to encounter difficult people, and I'm going to respond with calm instead of reacting with rage. Today, things are going to happen that I can't control, and I'm going to focus my energy exclusively on what I can control. Today, someone is going to try to ruin my peace, and I'm going to consciously choose not to give them that power over my inner state. 3 thoughts written in your own handwriting before the world gets the chance to write its own in your mind. That's the difference between a man who paints his soul and a man who lets the world paint it for him. 4th Stoic lesson. The difference between a man who masters his life and one who suffers through it lies in the 3 seconds between stimulus and response. 3 seconds. That's all that separates the man who controls his life from the man who is controlled by it. Not 3 years of intensive therapy, not 3 months of meditation in a Tibetan monastery, not 3 weeks of a certified emotional intelligence course with a diploma included. 3 seconds, the time it takes for one deep breath, the time it takes your heart to beat 4 times. The shortest and at the same time most powerful interval of your existence as a human being, because in those 3 seconds, something extraordinary happens if you give them the chance to exist, if you don't run them over with the urgency of your automatic reaction. In those 3 seconds, the rational part of your brain, the part that evolved to think, to evaluate, to calculate consequences, has time to catch up with the emotional part that already took off running toward the automatic response like a dog chasing a car with no idea what it'll do if it catches it. In those 3 seconds, the most important question of your life, how do I want to respond to this, has time to form in your consciousness before the predetermined response executes without your permission. In those 3 seconds, the difference between reacting like an animal and responding like a conscious human being materializes as the difference between falling off a cliff because you didn't see the edge and stopping just in time because you gave yourself propped 3 seconds to look where you were stepping. Without those 3 seconds, you're a stimulus response machine as predictable as a vending machine. Put in the right coin and out comes the expected product. Every time, without variation, without surprise, without the slightest possibility that the result will be different from what was programmed. Something happens, you react. Someone says something that bothers you. Your mouth responds before your brain finishes processing what it heard. Someone does something that irritates you. Your body tenses. Your voice rises. Your words come firing out loaded with an emotion you didn't evaluate, didn't measure, didn't compare against the actual magnitude of the stimulus that triggered it, and that's probably disproportionate to the point of absurdity. Without those 3 seconds, there's no space between what happens to you and what you do with what happens to you. And without space, there's no choice. And without choice, there's no freedom. And without freedom, there's no functional difference between you and an animal that bites because someone stepped on its tail. With those 3 seconds, everything changes. The same stimulus that without the pause produces a destructive explosion, with the pause produces a constructive evaluation. My boss just spoke to me disrespectfully. I feel anger rising in my chest. 3 seconds. I breathe. What's the smartest thing I can do right now? What response serves me instead of serving my impulse? That sequence of thought cannot exist without the 3-second pause. Without it, what exists is the animal version. My boss talked down to me, followed immediately by a response that can range from the sarcastic comment that destroys your professional reputation to the door slam that ensures your next conversation with your boss is a termination meeting. Marcus Aurelius practiced this pause with a discipline that should serve as a mirror for anyone who says, "I just can't control myself," as though it were a medical condition rather than a lack of training. Marcus Aurelius was a human being with the same primitive emotions as you, with the same circuits of anger and fear and frustration that evolution installed in his brain exactly as it installed them in yours. He felt rage when he was betrayed. He felt frustration when his best plans failed. He felt the visceral temptation to respond impulsively to the constant provocations he received from an empire that seemed to conspire to knock him off his center every day. And he chose the pause, every time. Not because it was easy, because he had trained himself for years to insert that 3-second space between stimulus and response. And that training, that discipline of the pause, practiced thousands of times in small situations, is what allowed him to maintain his calm in situations where most people would have lost far more than their composure. Seneca described anger as a fire that consumes the house of the one who feels it, long before it ever touches the house of the one who provoked it. And the 3-second pause is the most effective extinguisher that exists. It doesn't put out the emotion, because emotions can't be extinguished with a button. It doesn't eliminate anger, because anger is a legitimate biological response your body produces in the face of what it perceives as a threat or an injustice. What the pause does is give you just enough time, the minimum but sufficient interval, to decide whether you want to let the fire spread freely and consume your house, your relationship, your reputation, your career, or whether you want to contain it before the damage is irreparable. 3 seconds of pause between feeling the anger and acting from the anger. That's the difference between a man who loses his marriage over an argument that escalated due to a lack of pause, and a man who has the same difficult argument but handles it with the emotional intelligence that only the pause can provide. Epictetus taught that at the exact moment of emotional stimulus, your mind presents you with 2 paths simultaneously, and that the choice between them happens in an instant so brief that most people don't even notice there was a choice, that there was a moment where they could have taken the other direction. One path is the automatic reaction, the shout, the insult, the flight, the passive aggression, the resentful submission, whatever your emotional programming has established as the default response for that type of stimulus. The other path is the deliberate response, the pause, the evaluation, the question, what's the wisest thing I can do here and now with the information I have? Both paths exist always, in every situation, in the face of every stimulus, in the face of every provocation. The difference is that the first path requires 0 effort and the second requires exactly 3 seconds of conscious will. 3 seconds that separate a life suffered through, dragged along by every emotional stimulus that appears, from a life directed with the precision of someone who knows where they're going and won't allow a 3-second emotion to derail a course built over years. Your assignment for this lesson is to practice the 3-second breath at least 3 times today, not in extreme situations where the emotion is so intense you don't yet have the training to handle it. In minor everyday situations that give you the chance to practice on safe ground. Someone says something that mildly irritates you, and instead of responding with the automatic speed you're used to, you breathe deeply for 3 seconds and then respond from your reason instead of your impulse. An email frustrates you, and instead of typing the sarcasm-loaded reply your fingers want to produce automatically, you breathe for 3 seconds, reread the email with less reactive eyes, and write the response your most intelligent version would write. Your kid does something that bothers you, and instead of raising your voice with the speed of a reflex, you breathe for 3 seconds and speak to them with the firmness of a parent who controls the situation instead of the rage of an adult who lost control of himself. 3 times today, 3 breaths of 3 seconds each. And at the end of the day, write down what would have happened without the pause versus what happened with it. That difference, written on paper in real ink, is going to show you with a clarity that admits no argument the incalculable value of 3 seconds of silence in the middle of a life dominated by instant reaction. Fifth Stoic lesson. Seneca warned that anger is brief madness, and you've made decisions in those moments of madness that cost you years to repair, or that you'll never be able to repair. Seneca didn't use the word madness as literary metaphor or rhetorical exaggeration to make a dramatic point in one of his letters. He used it as a precise, clinical diagnosis, the result of decades of observing human behavior with the merciless eye of someone who doesn't prettify what he sees. He observed people under the grip of anger, from slaves to senators, from foot soldiers to generals, and what he saw was indistinguishable from madness in its most literal expression. Bulging eyes that no longer see reality, but the distorted version anger projects onto it. Faces deformed by muscular tension that transforms normal features into unrecognizable masks of fury. Hands trembling with an energy that doesn't know where to direct itself and ends up directed at whatever is nearest and most fragile. Voices distorted beyond recognition, as though another person was speaking through the body of the enraged. And most importantly, most dangerously, what makes anger genuinely indistinguishable from madness? A total, absolute disconnection from reality and consequences. A person in a state of genuine anger doesn't process consequences, doesn't calculate costs, doesn't assess damage, doesn't weigh options. They're operating on the most primitive part of their brain, the part designed to fight a predator on the African savannah 100,000 years ago, not to have a difficult conversation with their partner in a modern kitchen or respond to a passive-aggressive email from their boss. Brief madness. 2 words that describe with a precision that should terrify you what happens to you every time anger seizes control of your nervous system. Brief, because it doesn't last long in its acute phase. Seconds, sometimes minutes, rarely more than an hour at its peak intensity, but real, genuine, clinical madness during that time. Madness in the most literal sense of the word. A temporary but complete loss of reason, of judgment, of the ability to clearly evaluate what you're doing, what you're saying, and what consequences your actions and words are going to have for the next years or decades of your life. And in those seconds or minutes of brief madness, in that tiny window of temporary insanity, you've made decisions that cost you years of your life to repair, maybe decades. Maybe they're decisions you'll never be able to repair because the damage they caused is permanent and irreversible. Think of the worst decision you made from anger, not in the abstract, not in general, in concrete terms, with a name and a face, the specific decision, the specific words that left your mouth before your rational brain could intercept them, the specific act you committed while brief madness had complete control of your body, your voice, your hands, that exact moment where the rational you, the you that thinks and evaluates and calculates and worries about consequences, vanished completely as if it had never existed and was replaced by someone you don't recognize when the episode ends. Someone you look at with retrospective horror, asking yourself, was that me? Did I say that? Did I do that? Maybe it was a relationship you destroyed with words you can never take back, no matter how much you want to. Words spoken in 30 seconds of blind fury that demolished years of trust, built patiently, day by day, conversation by conversation, moment by moment. Words that left your mouth like projectiles and hit the person you most wanted to protect with a destructive precision your rational version would never, under any circumstances, have allowed. And when the madness passed, when the anger dissipated like smoke after an explosion, when reason returned to the driver's seat. You looked at the emotional wreckage of what you'd destroyed in half a minute and felt something far worse than the anger that caused the destruction. The cold horror of recognizing what you did and the paralyzing helplessness of knowing you can't undo it, that the words have been spoken, that the damage has been done, that the glass has broken, and no matter how much you glue the pieces back together, the cracks are going to be visible forever. Maybe it was a professional opportunity you incinerated because you responded to a provocation from your boss or a colleague with the irrational intensity, anger, demanded in that instant instead of the strategic intelligence the situation required. A promotion lost, a reputation damaged, a career derailed or destroyed by 30 seconds of brief madness that cost you more than the original provocation ever could have cost you if you'd had the ability to respond with calm instead of reacting with fury. Maybe it was a physical act you wish you could erase from history, a blow thrown in the heat of the moment that forever changed the dynamic of a relationship. A broken object that represented something beyond its material value and whose destruction left an emotional mark on those who witnessed it that no physical repair will ever erase. A door punched to pieces. A wall with a hole you patched and painted over, but that your family remembers with precision every time they walk past it, even though the new paint covers the visible damage, because the real damage wasn't in the wall, but in the trust of those who watched an adult lose control of himself that way. Seneca documented with a chilling level of precision the observable effects of anger on people. He described how a person dominated by anger momentarily becomes someone literally unrecognizable, as if a different entity inhabited their body during the episode, how their face distorts with muscular tension that makes them look like another person, how their eyes fill with an intensity that frightens those around them, including their own children, their own partner, the people who are supposedly the safest in their presence, how their voice changes in tone, volume, and texture as if literally another person was speaking through their mouth. And Seneca posed a question you need to answer today with the total honesty this series has demanded from the first word. If someone had recorded a video of you during your last episode of anger and showed it to you right now on this screen, would you recognize the person in the video as someone you're proud of? Or would you feel the deep, silent shame of watching an adult, a man of 30, 40, 50 years being controlled by an emotion with the same helplessness as a 3-year-old being controlled by a tantrum? Marcus Aurelius faced provocations that would have justified the most explosive anger you can imagine. People who betrayed him while smiling to his face. Decisions by incompetent generals that cost thousands of human lives he had sworn to protect. Injustices he would have had every power in the world to punish with an imperial fury that no senator, no general, and no citizen would have questioned, because he was the emperor and his anger was law. And he chose not to. Not because he didn't feel the anger roaring inside his chest like a caged animal begging to be released. Because he knew, with the wisdom of someone who had studied the consequences of brief madness his entire life, that decisions made from anger are invariably the worst decisions a human being can make. He wrote to remind himself in the hardest moments. The best revenge is to not be like your attacker. Don't respond to another's madness with your own madness. Don't let the anger of the one who provokes you infect you with their disease like a virus jumping from one body to the next. Keep your reason on steady, functioning especially when the other person's reason has shut off and their brief madness is trying to shut off yours too. Epictetus taught something you need to hear and process until it becomes part of your basic understanding of how anger works. Anger causes more damage to the one who feels it than to the target of the anger. The man you yell at suffers for a moment and then moves on with his life. You carry the weight of what you said for hours, days, sometimes weeks or months after the episode. You carry the shame of having lost yourself, the remorse of having said what you said, the practical consequences of the damage you caused, the deteriorated relationship you now have to repair if it can be repaired at all, the destroyed image of yourself as someone rational, controlled, reliable. Anger promises you power in the moment you feel it and delivers destruction when it passes. It promises you justice and delivers chaos. It promises you'll win the confrontation, and what you win is regret that lasts longer than the momentary satisfaction you felt when you exploded. Your assignment for this lesson is to do a brutal, detailed inventory of anger's costs in your life. Write down 3 specific moments with dates, if you remember them, where anger made a decision for you that you wouldn't have made if you'd been in your right mind. For each one, write 3 things. First, what anger decided on your behalf during the brief madness? Second, what your reason would have decided if you'd had the 3 seconds of pause from the previous lesson to think before acting. Third, what was the real, concrete cost of anger's decision, measured not in abstract concepts, but in verifiable damage to specific relationships, lost opportunities you can name, and consequences you still carry today as you listen to these words. When you see those costs written on paper, when you see them with the cold, relentless clarity of someone examining a detailed invoice for what they've paid over years of blind obedience to an emotion that never, not once, had the right to make decisions on your behalf, you're going to understand with a depth that will change you why the Stoics devoted more effort, more writing, and more attention to mastering anger than to any other emotion. Because no other emotion has the capacity to destroy so much, so fast, so irreversibly, in so little time. 6th Stoic lesson. You confuse emotional intensity with truth, and you believe that if something feels strong, then it must be real, and you must obey it. There's a cognitive trap your mind sets for you every time an intense emotion appears, and it's a trap so effective that you've probably fallen into it thousands of times without even noticing it was a trap. The trap is this: your mind equates intensity with truth. The stronger something feels, the truer it seems, and the truer it seems, the more obligated you feel to obey it. It's an automatic circuit that runs without your permission, and that has made more decisions on your behalf than you dare to count. If you feel mild anger at something that bothers you, you can let it pass. You notice it, register it, and continue your day without it altering anything significant. If you feel moderate anger, you give it more attention, give it some mental space, but maybe decide not to act because the situation doesn't warrant it. But if you feel explosive anger, anger that fills your chest as if something physical were pressing from inside, that accelerates your heart until you feel it in your temples, that tenses every muscle in your body, as if you were about to enter a fight to the death, your mind automatically, without consulting you, without asking your permission, concludes, this is truth. This is real. This is so intensely strong that it must be legitimate. The intensity of what I feel is proof that what I feel is right. I must act accordingly immediately. And you act, not because you evaluated the situation with your reason engaged, because the raw intensity of the emotion convinced you the emotion was right, simply because it was shouting louder than any other voice inside your head. But intensity is not evidence of truth. Intensity is evidence of intensity. Nothing more, nothing less. An emotion can be extraordinarily intense, can feel like the most real thing you've ever experienced in your life, can fill your entire body with a force that seems irrefutable, and be completely, absolutely, verifiably wrong at the same time. You can feel an explosive anger that demands you destroy something over a misunderstanding that clears up 5 minutes later with a simple conversation. You can feel a paralyzing fear in a situation that, evaluated with the coldness of reason, contains no real threat, only the distorted shadow of a threat your mind manufactured from incomplete and biased data. You can feel devastating jealousy that burns inside you like acid, based on a completely wrong interpretation of something you saw or heard, that your mind, fed by unprocessed insecurities, converted into evidence of a betrayal that never happened. In every one of those cases, the emotion was screaming, "This is true," with all its force, with all the conviction of a witness swearing to tell the truth before a judge. And it was lying. It was absolutely wrong. But because it was screaming so loudly, because the intensity was so overwhelming, you believed it. You gave it your vote of confidence without checking its credentials. Because you confuse volume with truth. You confuse the force of the shout with the soundness of the argument. It's as though you believe the person who shouts loudest in an argument is the one who's right. Absurd when you think about it, coolly sitting in your chair, listening to these words. But it's exactly, precisely, literally what you do with your emotions every time an intense emotion shows up. The emotion that shouts loudest inside your head wins your automatic obedience regardless of whether it's right or delusional. Anger shouts louder than patience, so you obey anger even though patience had a better argument. Fear shouts louder than curiosity, so you obey fear even though curiosity would have led you to an opportunity you're now never going to know. Anxiety shouts louder than confidence, so you obey anxiety even though confidence had more evidence on its side, not because anger, fear, or anxiety were right, because they shouted louder. And you've been confusing shouting loudly with being right your entire adult life, without anyone confronting you with how absurd that confusion is. Think about how many decisions you've made based exclusively on the intensity of what you felt, rather than on the quality of the information the emotion was carrying. Relationship decisions made from a passion that felt like eternal love, like a soul-level certainty that needed no verification, and that turned out to be temporary infatuation that evaporated in weeks, leaving behind a commitment that took years to undo. Financial decisions made from a fear that felt like legitimate prudence, like the voice of experience advising you not to risk it, and that turned out to be pure cowardice that cost you financial opportunities that are never coming back. Career decisions made from an anger that felt like offended dignity, like the legitimate roar of a man who won't be walked on, and that turned out to be an impulsive tantrum that left you without a job, without a professional reference, and with a reputation for being unstable that took years to repair. In every one of those cases, the intense emotion disguised itself as truth, using intensity as its only credential. And you opened the door wide and handed over the keys to your life, because its credential seemed legitimate when it wasn't. Marcus Aurelius was extraordinarily aware of this trap, and protected himself from it with a methodical discipline he applied to every important decision of his reign and personal life. Before acting from an intense emotion, no matter how urgently the emotion made him believe the situation was, he would stop and do something you need to learn to do with the same discipline. Question the emotion. Not deny it, not suppress it, not pretend he didn't feel it. Question it with respect but with firmness, like a judge who hears the witness but doesn't allow the witness to dictate the sentence. Ask it, are you truth or are you just intense? Does your strength come from the objective reality of the situation or from my exaggerated, distorted interpretation of what happened? Is what I feel genuinely proportional to the real magnitude of what occurred? Or am I amplifying a minor event into a catastrophe to justify the intensity I want to feel? Seneca specifically warned about a phenomenon that is lethal for decision-making, the emotion that disguises itself as intuition. That gut feeling that something is wrong, which sometimes in specific instances is genuine intuition based on real data your subconscious mind processed before your conscious mind could catch up, but which many other times, with a frequency that would surprise you if you could measure it, is simply generalized anxiety, desperately searching for a justification for its existence, an object to attach itself to so it can seem legitimate. The devastating problem is that both sensations, genuine intuition based on real data and paranoid anxiety based on your mind's catastrophic fantasies, feel exactly the same in your body. They produce the same physical sensation of alarm, the same heart acceleration, the same muscular tension, the same urgency to act immediately. And if you haven't developed the ability to distinguish between the two, using rational tools rather than emotional ones, you're going to obey the paranoid anxiety half the time, believing in all sincerity that you're following your intuition. Seneca proposed a simple but extraordinarily effective test for separating truth from intensity, the test of time. Before acting from an intense emotion, before obeying the urgent instruction, the emotion is shouting in your ear, "Wait." You don't need to wait a day or a week. Just long enough for the intensity to drop a single degree. An hour, sometimes less. And when the intensity has dropped that degree, evaluate the situation again with your reason available. If the emotion is still there after the intensity dropped, if the emotional argument holds up when the urgency calms down, it probably has some truth that deserves to be considered by your rational counsel. If the emotion disappeared or drastically reduced the moment the intensity dropped, if what you felt an hour ago now seems exaggerated or even absurd, it was intensity without substance. It was noise disguised as signal. It was thick, dark smoke that made you believe there was a fire when there wasn't. And you would have made a decision based on smoke without fire if you'd acted at the moment of peak intensity the way your emotion was demanding. Epictetus taught that emotions are like witnesses in a trial. They can contribute valuable information about what happened, but should never, under any circumstances, in any fair court, be judge and jury at the same time. You listen to the emotional witness with respect and attention. You register what it says. You note its testimony carefully, but you don't give it the power to dictate the final sentence about what to do. The sentence is dictated by your reason after hearing the emotional witness, the rational witness, the witness of past experience, and the witness of future consequences. The emotion is one witness among several. It has a legitimate voice in the room, but no deciding vote on the verdict. And the day you gave your emotions a deciding vote, the day you let the intensity of one witness determine the sentence without hearing the others, was the day you started living in a state of permanent injustice toward yourself and everyone around you. Your assignment for this lesson is to start applying Seneca's test of time to your intense emotions, starting today. The next time you feel an emotion so strong it demands immediate action, that screams at you that you must act right now, or something terrible is going to happen, don't act. Wait, consciously, deliberately. Let enough time pass for the intensity to drop even 1 degree. It could be an hour. It could be until the next day, if the situation allows it. And when the intensity has dropped, when the scream has become a more manageable murmur, evaluate again, with your reason engaged and your ability to calculate consequences functioning. Does the situation truly deserve the explosive response the emotion was demanding when it was screaming at full volume? Or was the emotion exaggerating the magnitude of what happened to justify its own intensity? The honest answer to that question is going to show you, with a frequency that will surprise and probably embarrass you, how many times in your life you've blindly obeyed emotions that were lying with spectacular conviction. Seventh Stoic lesson. Epictetus was a slave to another man, but was never a slave to his emotions. And you are free on the outside, but chained on the inside. The most brutal and painful irony of the modern human condition is contained in this lesson. And you need to feel it in your bones, not just understand it intellectually, for it to have the power to change something inside you. A man who was born a slave, who was the legal property of another human being from the day he opened his eyes until he was freed years later, who couldn't choose where to sleep or what to eat or when to rest or who to talk to or what to do with the hours of his own existence, who was physically abused by his master until he was left with a permanent disability that accompanied him every step, literally every step, for the rest of his life, as a reminder etched into his own body of the cruelty another human being had inflicted on him. That man, with those circumstances, with that starting point that makes yours look like paradise by comparison, achieved something that you, with all your external freedom, with all your constitutional rights, with your complete ability to go wherever you want, do whatever you want, and be whatever you want, haven't achieved yet. Inner freedom, absolute sovereignty over his own emotional world. Epictetus couldn't control what his master did with his body. That was completely outside his power, and he accepted it with the serenity of someone who understands the difference between what he can control and what he can't. But he discovered, in the most oppressive and degrading conditions a human being can face, that there was a territory within him, an armored, inaccessible inner space that his master couldn't touch no matter how many chains he put on his body. A space where anger could be observed as a wave that comes and goes without needing to be obeyed as a command. Where fear could be recognized as information about a perceived threat without becoming the tyrant making the decisions. Where physical and emotional pain could be felt in all its intensity without becoming the permanent identity of the one feeling it. That inner space, that internal citadel that no external force could invade unless he himself, voluntarily, from his own weakness, opened the gates and handed over the keys, was the most extraordinary conquest in the history of human thought. Not the conquest of a geographic territory, not the conquest of an empire, the conquest of himself, of the only territory that truly matters and that truly belongs to you. And you, who have no master controlling your body, who live in a society that guarantees you freedoms Epictetus never had even in his wildest dreams, who have the freedom to choose your job, your partner, your city, your food, your entertainment, your friends. Absolutely every external aspect of your existence that Epictetus couldn't choose, you haven't conquered that inner space. Not because you can't. You have exactly the same neurological capacity Epictetus had, to observe your emotions without obeying them. Exactly the same. You're not lacking hardware. You're lacking training. You're lacking the decision to start training. And, above all, you're lacking the awareness that training is necessary, that inner freedom doesn't come included with outer freedom as an accessory that activates automatically when nobody puts physical chains on you. Culture taught you that emotions are inevitable, uncontrollable reactions that are part of your fixed nature, and that your only option is to live them as they come, suffer them as they arrive, obey them as they appear like a ship without a rudder in an ocean of impulses that carry it wherever they please, while you, the supposed captain, sit on the deck watching the waves decide your course. That cultural teaching is the strongest chain you wear, stronger than any chain Epictetus carried on his wrists, because Epictetus's chains were visible and he knew he was wearing them. Yours are invisible, and you believe they don't exist. Epictetus put it with words that cut directly to the center of your illusion of freedom. He is free who lives as he wishes to live, not who lives where he wants to live, not who has what he wants to have, not who can buy what he wants to buy, who lives as he wishes to live. And living as you wish to live includes, before anything else, before the house, before the car, before the career, before the bank account, responding to what life presents you in the way you deliberately choose, and not in the way your emotional impulses automatically impose without your consent. If the way you live, if the quality of your daily experience is determined by your automatic emotional reactions instead of your deliberate rational decisions, you don't live as you wish to live. You live as your emotions force you to live, and that, no matter how much money you have in the bank or how many external options are available to you, is slavery. Comfortable, invisible, socially normalized, but pure, hard slavery all the same. The difference between Epictetus and you is not genetic. It's not that he was born with a superior temperament for emotional control that you didn't receive in the biological lottery. Historical sources suggest nothing of the sort. They suggest a man with emotions as intense and as human as anyone else's, facing circumstances that would have justified the most extreme and most understandable emotional explosions any modern psychologist could diagnose. The difference is a single one, and it's the same difference this series exists for you to eliminate. Epictetus trained, every day, for years, with the patience of an athlete who knows that strength isn't built in a day, but in thousands of days of repeated and frequently frustrating practice. He trained the ability to observe his emotions without blindly obeying them, to feel anger without allowing anger to dictate his next move, to feel fear without allowing fear to cancel his next decision, to feel pain without allowing pain to write the story of who he was and who he could become. Marcus Aurelius, from the opposite end of the social spectrum, demonstrated that this inner freedom isn't exclusive to those born into extreme adversity. He was born into the most obscene wealth. He had access to everything the material world can offer a human being, and he still needed exactly the same inner training as Epictetus to achieve emotional freedom. Because outer freedom, however complete it may be, doesn't produce inner freedom automatically. You can have everything the material world offers, absolutely everything, and still be a miserable slave to your impulses. You can be the most powerful man on the planet and have a comment from a mediocre courtier ruin your entire morning. Emotional slavery doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about your bank account or your title or your social position. It attacks with the same ferocity the rich and the poor, the powerful and the weak, the freeborn and the slave-born. And it's defeated by only one weapon: the daily training of conscious response over automatic reaction, the same training Epictetus practiced from the chains of physical slavery and Marcus Aurelius practiced from the throne of the greatest empire in the world. Seneca completed this vision with an observation that should unsettle you until you do something about it. Most technically, free people are functionally more enslaved than many slaves who existed in antiquity, because the slaves of antiquity at least knew with absolute certainty that they were slaves. They could see the chains, they could feel the weight of the iron on their wrists, and from that painful but honest knowledge they could dream of freedom, plan their liberation, work toward it with the motivation of someone who knows exactly what they want to be free from. People who are slaves to their emotions don't know they're chained. That's the lethal difference. They don't see the chains. They don't feel the weight. They genuinely believe their impulsive reactions are their authentic personality. They believe with total conviction that their inability to control themselves is their immutable nature, written into their DNA, part of who they are and always were and always will be. And that belief, that false certainty that this is just who I am and I'll always be this way, is the strongest, most resistant, and hardest to break chain of all that exists. Because it's a chain that can't be seen, that doesn't feel like a chain, that feels like identity. And nobody tries to break something they believe is part of themselves. Your assignment for this lesson is to do an honest, ruthlessly honest diagnosis of your emotional slavery, using a question Epictetus posed to his students to confront them with the reality of their inner condition. In what specific areas of your life do your emotions make decisions that should be made by your reason? Write down at least 5 recurring situations, 5 patterns that repeat with clockwork regularity, where a specific emotion takes control of your behavior and produces an action that your rational version, the version of you that thinks clearly and calculates consequences, would never approve if given the chance to weigh in before the emotion acts. For each one, identify with precision the emotion that governs that pattern, the specific behavior that emotion produces when it takes control, and what your reason would choose to do if the emotion weren't shouting so loudly that reason can't make itself heard. That list is the detailed map of your inner slavery. And the first step to freeing yourself from any slavery, as Epictetus knew better than anyone in history, is knowing exactly where the chains are, what they're made of, and who holds the key. The key, in your case, you hold. You've always held it. You just didn't know the chains existed. 8th Stoic lesson. Your emotions are information, not instructions, and the wise man listens to them but does not blindly obey them. If there's one sentence that absolutely summarizes everything we're working on in this episode, one sentence that should become your permanent mantra, the words you repeat to yourself every time an intense emotion tries to hijack your behavior, it's this: emotions are information, not instructions. 6 words. 6 words that contain the complete difference between a life governed by you with awareness and direction and a life governed by your impulses with the predictability of a vending machine. Information means data. Anger informs you that something inside you registered a perceived injustice. Fear informs you that something inside you detected what it interprets as a threat. Sadness informs you that something inside you processed what it feels as a loss. Jealousy informs you that something inside you perceives a threat to something you value deeply. Shame informs you that something inside you believes you violated a social standard you consider important. Every emotion, without exception, carries a message. A data point about how your internal system is interpreting what's happening around you. And those data points are genuinely valuable. They're legitimately useful. They deserve to be heard with attention and respect, because they tell you things about yourself, about your deepest values, about your unresolved insecurities, about your unmet needs, about your unhealed wounds that cold reason alone can't detect with the same speed or emotional sensitivity. The catastrophic problem, the problem that has ruined more decisions in your life than any other single factor, isn't that emotions bring information. That's desirable. The problem is that emotions don't settle for informing. They try to disguise themselves as executive instructions. They don't just tell you something seems unfair to you and step back to let you process the data. They tell you something seems unfair to you and you must act immediately, right now, without thinking, to fix it by shouting, insulting, pounding the table, sending that poison-loaded message, Making an irreversible decision at the worst possible time to make an irreversible decision. They don't just tell you, something seems threatening, like a radar detecting possible danger and alerting you to evaluate. They tell you, something seems threatening and you must flee immediately. Avoid the situation at all costs. Cancel the commitment that scares you. Hide from what frightens you. Abandon the opportunity before the opportunity proves you weren't capable. The emotion doesn't settle for its legitimate role as an informant. It wants to be the boss. It wants to give orders. It wants its information to automatically become executive action without passing through the filter of your reason, without being evaluated by your experience, without being tested against your judgment, without being weighed against the medium and long-term consequences that the emotion, by its own short-sighted and impatient nature, is incapable of calculating. And when you let emotional information convert directly into action without any intermediate filter, you're operating exactly the way an animal operates. An animal feels fear and flees, feels anger and attacks, feels hunger and eats. There's no filter between emotion and action, no evaluation. No pause where the animal asks itself, is fleeing really the smartest thing I can do right now, or am I reacting disproportionately to something that isn't actually as threatening as my nervous system is making me believe? There's only stimulus response, input, output, emotion, action. No intermediate processing, no awareness, no choice. What distinguishes you from an animal, what makes you genuinely human, in the deepest, most noble sense of the word, is not your ability to feel emotions. Animals feel emotions with an intensity comparable to yours. They feel fear, they feel anger, they feel pain. What distinguishes you, what evolution gave you, as the most powerful tool any living being has ever received, is your ability to place a rational, conscious, deliberate filter between the emotion you feel and the action you execute. To receive the emotional information, register it with attention, evaluate it with your reason, contrast it with objective reality, calculate the consequences of different possible responses, and choose the response that is most intelligent, most constructive, most aligned with your values and long-term goals, instead of the response that is most automatic, most primitive, most immediate, and almost invariably most destructive. That capacity for conscious filtering is your humanity in its highest expression. And every time you bypass it, every time you allow the emotion to convert directly into action without passing through the filter that makes you human, you voluntarily renounce your humanity and operate at the same level of consciousness as the animal that bites because someone stepped on its tail. Marcus Aurelius treated his emotions as exactly what they are, messengers that deserve to be heard with attention, but that must never, under any circumstances, be obeyed without questioning. When he felt anger at a real injustice, and he felt a lot of anger because he was a passionate man facing enormous injustices, he listened to the message with respect. Something isn't fair. Something needs to be corrected. He registered the information carefully. And then, instead of obeying the instruction anger had packaged with the message, he asked his rational counsel, "What is the wisest response to this injustice? What response produces the best outcome, not just for my immediate emotional satisfaction, but for everyone involved in the long term?" And the answer from reason, informed by the emotion but not dictated by it, almost never matched the original instruction anger had brought. Anger said, "Punish the guilty one right now." Reason said, "Understand first why they acted that way. Then act with justice instead of vengeance." Anger said, React immediately to show you won't tolerate this. Reason said, wait until you have all the information, evaluate calmly, then respond with exactly the right force, no more and no less than the situation requires. Anger screamed with the urgency of a fire. Reason whispered with the calm of an architect who knows structural decisions aren't made under pressure. And Marcus Aurelius, with the discipline of someone who had trained his inner ear through decades of daily practice, heard the whisper of reason above the deafening shout of anger, not because the whisper was louder, because he had trained the ability to hear it. Seneca proposed a mental exercise that is one of the most sophisticated tools for emotional self-management ever conceived, the inner counsel. When an intense emotion appeared and demanded immediate action, instead of obeying it with the submission of a slave who doesn't question the master, Seneca would mentally convene a council where the emotion had the right to present its case, but was neither the only voice in the room, nor by any means the voice with the most authority. In that mental council, the emotion spoke first. I'm furious because this is unjust, and I must act now. But then reason spoke. I understand the anger, but acting now without complete information could cause more damage than it repairs. Then experience spoke. The last 3 times I acted from anger, the result was worse than the original situation. Then prudence spoke. The consequences of acting now are potentially irreversible. The consequences of waiting a day are minimal. Then long-term consequences spoke. If I act as anger demands, a week from now I'll regret it. If I wait and act from calm, a week from now I'll be satisfied with my decision. And only after hearing all the voices, only after considering all the perspectives that the emotion alone is incapable of considering because its nature is urgent and one-sided, did Seneca make a decision, not the decision the emotion wanted. The decision the full council recommended as the most intelligent, the most just, and the most sustainable after evaluating the situation from every possible angle. Epictetus simplified this process for his students with a practical rule so simple it leaves no room for excuses. When an emotion tells you to do something urgently, ask it what consequences what it's asking you to do will have. If the emotion can't answer that question clearly and in detail, don't obey it. And emotions never, ever, under any circumstances, can answer that question clearly. Because calculating consequences isn't their function. It's not what they exist for. Their function is to alert, inform, flag, activate attention towards something that might be relevant. Calculating consequences, evaluating options, weighing costs and benefits, that's the exclusive function of your reason. And when you allow the emotion to do its legitimate job of informing, and also arrogate your reason's job of deciding what to do with the information, the result is invariably and inevitably catastrophic. Decisions made with the irrational urgency of someone fleeing a fire applied to everyday situations that aren't fires, and that required the calm of a strategist, not the panic of a fugitive. Your assignment for this lesson is to practice the conscious separation between information and instruction at least 3 times today. Every time an emotion shows up and wants you to act immediately, every time you feel the urgency to do something right now before your reason has time to weigh in, stop and write in your mind or on paper, if you have it available, 2 completely separate things. First, the information the emotion is bringing. I'm feeling anger because my coworker took credit for my idea in the meeting. That's the legitimate information, valid, useful. It deserves your attention and serious consideration. Second, the instruction the emotion wants to impose. I must go confront him right now in front of everyone, raise my voice so the whole department hears, publicly accuse him, and expose him as the idea thief he is. That's the urgent instruction, the emotion packaged alongside the information. Don't execute it automatically. Evaluate it first with your inner counsel. Ask your reason, your experience, your prudence, and your consequence calculator. Does that instruction produce the best possible outcome for me in the long term? Does it bring me closer to where I want to be professionally, or push me further away? Does it solve the problem or create 3 new ones? Is the momentary satisfaction of confronting worth the potential cost to professional relationships, to reputation, to the perception my superiors have of my emotional maturity? The honest answer to those questions is your real decision, not the impulsive instruction of the emotion. The informed conclusion of your reason after receiving, hearing, thanking, and critically evaluating the information the emotion brought you as a legitimate messenger, but an illegitimate dictator. 9th Stoic lesson. Every emotional explosion you justify with, "That's just who I am," is a voluntary renunciation of becoming who you could be. That's just who I am. 3 words, the 3 most destructive words you can speak about yourself, the 3 words that function as a granite headstone on the grave of your potential, the 3 words that lock the door to your transformation with a padlock only you can open, but that you refuse to touch, because those 3 words convinced you the door doesn't exist, that there's nothing on the other side, that the person you are today, with all your emotional explosions, with all your uncontrolled reactions, with all the damage those reactions have caused to the people you love most, is the final, definitive, immovable version of yourself. Every time you explode emotionally and say, "That's just who I am," as an explanation, as a justification, as a defensive shield against those who question your behavior, or against your own conscience that knows what you did was wrong, you're doing something you need to see with total clarity, because it's the most self-destructive maneuver you perform on a regular basis. You're choosing the known comfort of staying exactly as you are over the unknown discomfort of becoming someone better. You're choosing the familiar identity of the one who reacts without control, because it's the identity you know and that you've mastered, even though it destroys you, over the unknown identity of the one who responds with awareness, because it's an identity you've never explored, and that scares you to explore because you don't know what it feels like to be that person. You're choosing the easy version of you, the one that requires no work, no discipline, no discomfort of changing deeply rooted habits, over the version that requires daily effort but produces results. The easy version will never produce. And you're disguising that cowardly choice as immutable nature so you don't have to admit to yourself and to others that it is a choice, that you could choose differently, that you have the ability to choose differently, and that every day you don't choose differently is a day you gift to the smallest version of yourself. "That's just who I am" is not a description of your genetic nature or your neurological composition or any fixed, unalterable condition of your being. It's a declaration of surrender disguised as self-knowledge. It's telling the universe, "I refuse to work on this." It's telling the people you repeatedly hurt with your emotional explosions, "Get used to it, because I have no intention whatsoever of doing anything about it." Telling your partner, "Learn to live with the uncertainty of not knowing when I'm going to explode, because I have no plans to learn not to explode." It's telling your children, "Normalize this behavior because your father normalized it and isn't even going to try to change it." It's telling yourself, every time you say it, "The extraordinary man I could be if I trained my emotional control with the same discipline I train my body or my professional career is a man I'm never going to meet because I prefer the mediocre comfort of being the uncontrolled man I already am." Think about what you're really declaring every time you use, "That's just who I am," to justify behavior you deep down know is unacceptable. You're declaring that your capacity for personal growth has a ceiling, and you've already hit it. That the person you are today, with all the destructive reactions you've watched, cause real damage to real people who genuinely matter to you, that person is the final version, the definitive model. The last software update to your personality, that there's no patch available, that there's no improved version possible, that there doesn't exist a version of you that responds with strategic calm where the current version screams with blind fury. That there doesn't exist a version of you that evaluates before acting where the current version explodes first, thinks second, and regrets third. That there doesn't exist a version of you that consciously chooses its response where the current version automatically obeys whatever impulse shows up with enough intensity. That's exactly what you declare every time you say those three words, and it's a lie. The most comfortable and most expensive lie you tell yourself. Comfortable, because it immediately frees you from the uncomfortable responsibility of working on your character, of admitting you need to improve, of facing the reality that what you're doing isn't working, and that continuing to do it while expecting different results is the textbook definition of insanity. Expensive, because every year that passes, believing that lie, every year lived under the roof of "that's just who I am," is another year that the person you could genuinely become, if you did the work, waits patiently on the other side of a door you refuse to open because you convinced yourself the door is a wall. The Stoics rejected this idea with an absolute vehemence that left no room for ambiguity. For them, the human being is a permanent construction project from the first day to the last, not a finished product that comes from the factory with fixed, unalterable specifications. Marcus Aurelius transformed throughout his entire life in ways that are documentable and verifiable. The impatient, privileged Marcus Aurelius of 20 looks nothing like the serene, profound Marcus Aurelius of 30. The 30-year-old looks nothing like the 40-year-old. The 40-year-old looks nothing like the one who wrote the Meditations in his final years, facing the most crushing adversity with a calm that seems supernatural, but is nothing more than the accumulated result of decades of deliberate training. If Marcus Aurelius had said, "That's just who I am" at 20 and stopped working on his character, the world would never have known the philosopher-emperor. It would have known another privileged young Roman with the same impulsive, immature reactions as every other privileged young Roman of his era. Forgotten by history alongside thousands of privileged men who never had the humility to admit they needed to change. Seneca transformed radically throughout his life in a way he himself documented with honesty. The young Seneca was ambitious to the point of obsession, impatient to the point of anxiety, given to excesses that he himself would criticize decades later with the perspective of someone who lived them and knows exactly what they cost. That young Seneca looks nothing like the mature Seneca who wrote the letters to Lucilius with a wisdom about impulse control that can only come from someone who spent decades working to master exactly the impulses that, in his youth, mastered him with total impunity. If Seneca had said, "That's just who I am" in his youth and stopped working on his character, he would never have produced the works that have transformed millions of lives over 2 millennia. He would have been another Roman senator, forgotten alongside thousands of senators who never had the honesty to look in the mirror or the discipline to change what they saw. Epictetus is the most powerful demonstration that "that's just who I am" is a cowardly lie. He transformed the identity of slave into the identity of teacher, the identity of victim into the identity of sage, the identity of powerless into the identity of free. If at any point during his life as a slave, while his leg was being broken, while he was being abused, while the world told him with every action that he was nothing and would never be anything, he had accepted that narrative as his immutable nature. If he had said, "This is just who I am, a slave, a broken man, this is all I can be," the history of Western thought would be fundamentally different and impoverished. But he didn't say it. He refused with every fiber of his being to define himself by his present circumstances or his present reactions. He defined himself by who he was willing to become, through daily work, through relentless discipline, and through the absolute refusal to accept that the current version of himself was the final version. There's something you need to understand about the phrase, "That's just who I am," that makes it especially poisonous and especially urgent to eliminate from your vocabulary. It doesn't just affect you. It profoundly affects everyone around you who depends on you for their emotional safety. When you say, "That's just who I am," to justify an explosion of anger in front of your family, what you're communicating to your partner, with or without words, is, "Get used to living with the uncertainty of not knowing when I'm going to explode again, because I have no intention of working to prevent it." What you're communicating to your children is, learn that adults don't control their emotions, that explosions are normal, that the way your father reacts is the way men work, because your father decided that's who he is, and he's not going to change. You're programming your children to repeat exactly your patterns when they become adults. You're planting in their developing brains the seed that emotional reactivity is nature, not habit. And that seed is going to bear fruit for decades in their own relationships, in their own families, in their own children who will inherit the same generational lie that this is just who we are, as if emotional slavery were a genetic trait rather than a learned pattern that can be unlearned with work. Your assignment for this lesson is to eliminate "that's just who I am" from your vocabulary immediately and irrevocably, and to replace it every time it appears in your mind or your mouth with a sentence that opens doors instead of closing them. "That's who I've been until now, but I'm training to be different." That sentence acknowledges the reality of your current pattern without converting it into a permanent sentence. It admits past behavior without declaring it immutable. It honestly accepts your starting point without confusing it with your final destination. Today, every time you catch yourself thinking, "That's just who I am," as an automatic justification for behavior your most rational, most aware version wouldn't approve of, stop it. Cut it off before it finishes forming, and consciously replace it, "That's who I've been until now. I'm training to be different." That linguistic correction seems minor, seems like a simple word game, but it's an interior revolution of proportions you can't anticipate, because it changes your identity from finished product to construction project, and a construction project has a future the finished product can't even dream of. 10th Stoic lesson. Today begins the most important training of your life, because the man who does not govern his emotions will be governed by them until the day he dies. We've arrived at the final lesson of this episode, and I want you to understand something with the absolute seriousness it deserves, because whether what you heard today becomes real transformation or just another podcast episode you listened to that made you feel something for 30 minutes and that you forgot before the week was over, depends on your understanding of this. What started today is not an episode of content you passively consume while doing something else. It's the beginning of a training that, if you take it seriously, if you apply the tools I gave you with the consistency of someone who understands this isn't entertainment, but emotional survival, is going to change the fundamental structure of how you experience every day of your life. Not life in the abstract, not life in general, your concrete life tomorrow. Next Monday's life when you get to work and your boss says something that irritates you. The next argument with your partner when the tension rises and your old patterns want to take control. The next moment with your kids when patience runs out and the primitive part of your brain wants to yell what the rational part knows it shouldn't. Each of those moments is a training ground, and what you do in each of those moments determines whether you're advancing toward inner freedom or reinforcing the chains of emotional slavery you've been feeding your whole life without knowing it. This is the most important training you're ever going to do, and that's not rhetorical exaggeration. It's a cold assessment of priorities. More important than any physical training you could do, because you can have the strongest, healthiest body in the world and have an uncontrolled emotion destroy your marriage, your relationship with your children, or your professional reputation in 30 seconds of brief madness that no muscle in the world can prevent. More important than any academic education, because you can have the most prestigious degree and the most extensive knowledge on the planet and have an unfiltered impulse, a reactive response at the wrong moment in front of the wrong people, ruin your career in a way no diploma can repair. More important than any professional skill, because without emotional control, without the basic ability to respond instead of react when the pressure rises, everything else you build in your life is under permanent, constant risk of being destroyed by the same person who built it. You, in a moment of brief madness where you stopped being you and allowed a 30-second emotion to make decisions with 30-year consequences. Marcus Aurelius understood, with crystal clarity, that emotional training is not an optional luxury for people with philosophical inclinations and spare time. It's a necessity as basic and non-negotiable as eating, as sleeping, as breathing. He wrote every morning as part of his daily emotional training, not when he felt inspired, every morning. He prepared himself mentally for what the day would bring with the same discipline a soldier uses to prepare for battle. He reminded himself of the principles that would guide his responses to the inevitable adversity each day would bring. He practiced the mental pause before he needed it in a real crisis. He strengthened his ability to respond with deliberate calm before the emotional storm arrived to test that ability. He didn't wait for the crisis to appear to start training. That would have been like waiting for the fire to break out to learn how to use the extinguisher. He trained every day, the good ones and the bad ones, the easy ones and the hard ones, to be ready when the crisis arrived without warning, as crises always do. And the crisis always came. Each day brought a new provocation, a new injustice, a new temptation to react with the speed of instinct instead of responding with the wisdom of trained reason. And each day, Marcus Aurelius was 1 degree more prepared than the day before because he had trained one more time. Seneca described emotional training as preventive maintenance of the soul with a precision that connects directly to your everyday life. Just as you maintain your body by exercising regularly so it doesn't deteriorate to the point of illness, just as you maintain your car by taking it to the mechanic before it breaks down in the middle of the highway, just as you maintain your house by repairing small cracks before they become structural damage, you must maintain your capacity for emotional control by actively practicing it daily before you need it in an emotional emergency where everything is on the line. Because in the emotional emergency, when anger explodes, when fear paralyzes, when anxiety overwhelms, there's no time to train. In the emergency, you can only use what you've already trained during the calm days. If you trained nothing, If you arrived at the emotional emergency without preparation, the emergency is going to find you completely unarmed, and the emotion is going to win the battle the way it has won every time it found you, without the minimum preparation to face it. Epictetus put it in terms that eliminate any space for procrastination or excuses. When are you going to start living as the person you want to be? Tomorrow? Next month? Next year? When conditions are perfect, which is just another way of saying never. Time passes at a speed you can't slow down, and it doesn't wait for you to make up your mind. Every day you postpone the start of emotional training is one more day you live as a slave to your impulses, while carrying the key to your liberation in your pocket and refusing to use it for the same reason you've avoided everything uncomfortable in your life. Because change requires effort, and slavery requires nothing except your submission. The man who does not govern his emotions will be governed by them. There's no middle ground. The comfortable option of not actively governing your emotions, while they also don't govern you, as if you could declare a truce with your impulses and live in a neutral zone where nobody's in charge, doesn't exist. Either you govern them with awareness, with training, with the daily discipline. This series is going to give you, tool by tool, over 12 episodes. Or they govern you with primitive automatisms and impulses that were designed for survival on a savanna 100,000 years ago, and haven't got the faintest idea how to handle a couple's argument, a work meeting, or a provocative text message. There's no possible tie, no neutral zone, no halfway point. It's conscious governance or automatic slavery, and the choice between the two renews every morning of every day for the rest of your life. What you have now, after this first episode of 12, are the first tools in an arsenal that's going to grow with every episode of this series. The foundational awareness that you are the observer of your emotions and not the emotions themselves. The practice of naming what you feel with the words, "I am feeling this," to create distance between who you are and what you feel. The revealing inventory of how many times a day you hand over control of your inner life to people and situations that don't deserve a single second of your peace. Marcus Aurelius's morning technique for choosing the color of your thoughts before the world paints your soul, the colors that suit it. The 3-second breath that creates the sacred space between stimulus and response, where your freedom lives. The inventory of anger's costs, that shows you in painful numbers what brief madness has cost you in relationships, opportunities, and years of peace you can't get back. Seneca's test of time for separating the intensity of emotional noise from the truth of a legitimate signal. The map of your emotional slavery that shows you with surgical precision exactly where the chains are that you didn't know you were wearing. The separation between information and instruction that lets you listen to your emotions with respect, without obeying them, with submission. And the elimination of "that's just who I am," replaced by "that's who I've been until now, but I'm training to be different," as the birth certificate of your emotional transformation. Your final assignment for this episode is to commit to a single concrete act of daily training for the next week. One act, not 10. Not a complete emotional transformation program with 50 steps that you abandon on day 3 because it was too much. One single act you can do every day without exception, even on the hardest day of the week, even on the day everything goes wrong and the last thing you want to do is train anything. And the act I suggest, the simplest and at the same time most transformative of all the ones I can give you, is the nightly emotional review. Every night before you go to sleep, for 5 non-negotiable minutes, review your emotional day with 3 questions. First, how many times did I react today without thinking? Just count. No judgment, no guilt, just the cold number? Second, in which of those reactions would the 3-second pause have changed the outcome? Identify the most costly one of the day, the one that did the most damage, or that embarrassed you the most when reason returned. Third, what am I going to do differently tomorrow when a similar situation comes up? Not a vague promise to be better. A concrete, specific, actionable step. 5 minutes, 3 questions, every night, for 7 consecutive nights. And at the end of that week, compare the record from day 1 with day 7. The difference won't be dramatic. You're not going to turn into Marcus Aurelius in 7 days. But you're going to notice something no self-help book can give you, and that only practice produces. Awareness grows. The speed of the automatic reaction that has governed your entire life decreases by 1 degree. The space between stimulus and response, that space where your freedom lives, expands by 1 millimeter. A single millimeter, and that millimeter, sustained with the consistency of someone who understands that real transformations are built millimeter by millimeter and not in magical leaps from one day to the next, is the beginning of a transformation that's going to turn you into someone your current version, the version enslaved by its impulses, can't even imagine. We've reached the end of episode 1 of Master Your Mind. This is Stoicism for winners. And what we did today was something nobody else is going to do for you. Turn on a light in a room where you've been living in the dark your entire adult life without knowing you were in the dark. The light of awareness that your emotions have been governing you without your permission or your knowledge. The light that there exists a space between what you feel and what you do. A tiny but infinitely powerful space where a freedom lives that you've never exercised because you didn't know it existed. The light that the Stoics, more than 2,000 years ago, had already completely mapped the territory of inner freedom and developed tools for conquering it that you didn't know until today were available to you. If this episode showed you something you hadn't seen before about yourself, drop in the comments the phrase we established at the start. Today, I stop obeying my impulses. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. With someone who loses their temper with a frequency that frightens the people around them and then feels remorse with a sincerity that does them no good because the damage is already done. With someone who says, "That's just who I am," every time they explode, as if it were an irreversible medical diagnosis instead of a lack of training that can be corrected. With someone who doesn't know there's a space between what they feel and what they do, and that in that microscopic space lies the freedom they've spent their entire life searching for in the wrong place, out there, when it was always inside. In the next episode, I'm going to teach you about that space. The sacred space between what happens to you and how you respond. The smallest and at the same time most powerful place that exists in the human universe. The place where Marcus Aurelius governed his mind before attempting to govern an empire. The place where Epictetus was completely free while his body remained in chains. The place where Seneca found an unbreakable calm while the world around him burned and crumbled. Episode 2 is called Between What Happens to You and How You Respond. There's a space that will change your life, and it's going to give you the tools to inhabit that space with the mastery of someone who understands with every cell of their being that true freedom isn't about being able to go wherever you want, or buy whatever you want, or do whatever you want. It's in the 3 seconds between stimulus and response that today, in this episode, you began to discover existed. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. And today, for the first time in your life, you saw the invisible chains you carry inside. The next session, we're going to start breaking them, one by one, link by link, until the only person who governs your interior is you. Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.